Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you very much. And PG, thank you very much for that introduction. And I know some of you guys had a rough night last night, but thank you very much for coming out here today. I want to do just a couple of things. I want to begin by suggesting a very radical idea for you. Ready for a radical idea? All right, here it is. Despite what you see on the evening news and on TV, elections in a democracy, or this particular election, is not about Hillary Clinton. It is not about Donald Trump. It is not about Bill Clinton. It is not about Mrs. Trump or the Trump kids. This election, unbelievably, is about you. This election is not a personality contest. You don't like Mr. Trump, you don't like Mrs. Clinton, fine. What this election is about is which candidate has the ideas and the program to improve life for the working families and the middle class of this country. That's what this election is about. And I believe that anyone who takes an objective look at the problems facing our country and the plans that each of the major candidates has will conclude without a doubt that on every major issue, Hillary Clinton is far and away the superior candidate and should be elected as our next president. What politics in a democratic society is supposed to be about is taking a hard look at the problems that we face, trying to figure out how we got to where we are, and then developing a vision of where we want to go as a people. So let me start off by saying that if we looked where we were 8 years ago today, what we would remember is that we were losing 800,000 jobs a month at the end of the Bush administration. 800,000 jobs a month, unprecedented job loss since the Great Depression of the 1930s. If we went back 8 years ago today, under the Bush administration's last year, we were running up the largest deficit in the history of the United States, $1.4 trillion. If we went back 8 years ago today, we would find that the American financial system and the world's financial system was on the verge of collapse, where people were worried that they put their credit card into an ATM machine and nothing would come out. We were talking about a global financial collapse. Under Bush, we had 8 years of trickle-down economics. We are not going back to trickle-down economics under Trump. Mr. Trump believes in trickle-down economics. He wants to give hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars in tax breaks to the very wealthiest people in this country, including his own family. Sorry, Mr. Trump, that ain't going to happen. Now, under President Obama, we have made significant improvements in the economy, and I thank the president for that. But, and I always say the big but that somehow comes out wrong. But there is another economic reality in as well. And this is what we have to deal with, and sometimes Democrats don't deal with it, and they're wrong not to deal with it. While we have made progress in the last 8 years, there is another economic reality that impacts people all over this country, especially in states like Ohio. And that is, for the last 40 years in America, we have seen an economic process in which the middle class of this country has been shrinking. And that means that we have millions of people in Ohio, in my state of Vermont, all over this country, good, decent people who cannot make it on one job. They're working 2 or 3 jobs to cobble together the income and the health care that they need. We have today in America, despite the improvements in our economy, 43 million Americans living in poverty. Now, the media doesn't talk about poverty. Most politicians don't talk about poverty. But in your community and in my community, there are people today who are worried about how they will feed their children, how they will put gas in the car in order to get to work, because if they can't afford to put gas in the car to get to work, they're going to get fired, and a bad situation becomes worse. There are millions of families in Ohio, Vermont, and throughout this country who have beautiful children, but they cannot afford to find quality, affordable child care. There are elderly people throughout this country who are cutting their prescription drugs, pills, in half because they cannot afford the medicine they need. There are disabled veterans who put their lives on the line for this country, trying to get by on $11,000 or $12,000 a year Social Security. Meanwhile, while the middle class over the last 40 years has been disappearing, while 43 million people live in poverty, there has been another economic phenomenon taking place. And that is that the wealthiest people and the largest corporations have done phenomenally well. And we have today more income and wealth inequality in America than at any time since 1928. We have more income and wealth inequality than almost any major country on earth. And what we have got to do is to think big, to ask questions that you're not going to see asked on CNN or CBS. Ask questions, why? Why is it that in America today, the top 1/10 of 1% owns as much wealth as the bottom 90%? Anybody think that's right? Today, while people in Vermont and Ohio are working incredibly hard, we work as a people. You don't hear much about this. We work the longest hours of any people in the industrialized world. We got millions and millions of people not working 40 hours, they're working 50, 60 hours a week. And yet, at the end of all of that, 52% of all new income generated goes to the top 1%. All right, what our job is, and what I'm here today to ask of you, are 2 things. Number 1, obviously, to work as hard as you can in the next 4 or 5 days to see that Hillary Clinton is elected president. But I'm asking something else of you. I'm asking something else of you. And that is to understand that politics does not end on Election Day. We need you. We need millions of Americans, and I think young people are going to play the leadership role in this regard, standing up to demand a government and a country that works for all of us, not just the CEOs of large corporations. In a million different ways. Every time you turn on the TV and you hear from most politicians, what they want of you is to think small, not big. I'm here to ask you to think big, not small. Now, in terms of this campaign, let's just go right down the issues. If you ask me, What I worry about most in terms of the future of our country, and I've got 4 kids and 7 beautiful grandchildren, what I worry about most is the trend in this country toward an oligarchic form of society. Do you know what I mean by that? What oligarchy is about is when you have a handful of wealthy people controlling the economic and political life of a nation. Now, this is not a new idea. It has existed in many countries all over the world. But we never believed it could happen in the United States of America. We're a democracy. We have a strong middle class. We have equal opportunity for all. That is what we had and what we believed we should have. Well, let me give you the bad news. Your economy today is controlled by fewer and fewer large multinational corporations. The media is controlled by a half a dozen major conglomerates. And now what we're seeing, as a result of this disastrous Citizens United Supreme Court decision, we are seeing our political system being controlled by a handful of wealthy campaign contributors. And one of the major differences between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump is Hillary Clinton believes, I believe, and most Americans believe that we have got to overturn this disastrous Citizens United Supreme Court decision. Right now, all over this country, I'm in touch with progressive candidates from Maine to Seattle, Washington. And right now, we are getting telephone calls where people say, we're doing well, we got great volunteer networks, went out knocking on doors, but the Koch brothers and the other billionaires are pouring huge amounts of money into the campaign. I just came from Wisconsin yesterday. Russ Feingold is running for the United States Senate there. They are pouring $7 million into that campaign in the last week alone. $7 million. And it's going on all over this country. Handful of billionaires spending hundreds of millions of dollars in order to elect candidates who will represent the wealthy and the powerful. Our job together, and Secretary Clinton understands this, is to overturn Citizens United to make sure that no Supreme Court justice nominated by Secretary Clinton, and this is her view, will get that nomination unless he or she is absolutely clear they will vote to overturn Citizens United. I want many of you who are interested in public service, interested in running for office, to be thinking about running for school board or city council or state legislature or president or whatever you want. But I want you to be able to do that by focusing on your ideas and communicating with your constituents, not having to spend your entire campaign raising money from the wealthy and the powerful. And here is another issue. Here is another huge issue when we talk about democracy. Right now, throughout this country, you got Republican governors and Republican legislatures that are doing everything they can to suppress the vote, to make it harder for poor people or old people or young people or people of color to vote. You know, what democracy is supposed to be about is bringing more and more people into the political process. So I say to those Republican governors who do not have the guts to participate in free, fair, and open elections, if you can't run on your ideas in a fair election, get out of politics and get another job. So here is thinking big, not small. What I want to see, and I hope you do as well, is the Congress to pass legislation which simply states that every person in this country 18 years of age or older is registered to vote. End of discussion. All right, if we are going to have a vibrant democracy, that's what we need to do. But if we're going to have a vibrant economy, we also have to take bold action. Number one, right now, in Ohio, in Vermont, and across this country, there are people who are working and working hard, but they're not going anywhere because the wages they receive are just too low. The minimum wage in Washington now, the federal minimum wage, is a starvation wage of $7.25 an hour. Our job is to raise that minimum wage to a living wage, $15 an hour. Again, I want you to think big, not small. This is America. We are the wealthiest country in the history of the world, but nobody knows that because almost all of the new wealth and income is going to the people on top. In America, it should be a basic economic principle that if you work 40 or 50 hours a week, you are not going to live in poverty. Raise the minimum wage to a living wage. There's another issue Secretary Clinton feels especially strongly about, and that is that in the year 2016, we still have the embarrassing and absurd situation where women are making 79 cents on the dollar compared to men. And I know that every man here will stand with the women in the fight for pay equity. Equal pay for equal work is not a radical idea. It is based on everything that we believe in as Americans. Think big, not small. The United States of America today is the only major country on earth that does not guarantee paid family and medical leave. Together, we're going to change that. Right now, and I want you to think about this. Again, think outside of the box. Don't just listen to what's on TV. Think outside of the box and ask yourself a simple question. Are American values about having a woman giving birth in Ohio today, having to separate herself from that beautiful new baby in a week or two because she doesn't have the income to stay home and nurse and love that baby? That is not an American value. That is the opposite of an American value. What Hillary Clinton believes and what I believe is we must have 12 weeks paid family and medical leave. Think big, not small. How many of you know how many major countries there are on earth today that do not guarantee health care to all people as a right? How many? All right, the answer is we are the only major country. I live 50 miles away from the Canadian border, and in Canada, every man, woman, and child has had guaranteed health care for many, many decades, and they spend substantially less per capita on health care than we do. It's the same thing in the UK, in Germany, in France, in Holland, throughout Scandinavia. In my view, health care is a right of all people, not a privilege. And I want you to think, when you think big, what it means that people do not have to worry about going to the doctor when they get sick or what happens to them if they end up in the hospital. Think about the kind of stress that is removed from people's lives. And I'll tell you something else that people don't talk about. There are millions of Americans today who are working at jobs they do not like. And they are working at those jobs for one reason. And that reason is they get decent health care benefits for their families. If we had guaranteed health care for all people, folks could go out and do the work they want, start their own businesses, and not worry about whether their families will have health care or not. If you ask the American people today what they consider to be one of the major health care crises they face, they will tell you that they are sick and tired of paying outrageously high prices for prescription drugs. In recent years, the cost of prescription drugs have soared, while last year, the top 5 drug companies made $50 billion in profit, and the top 10 pharmaceutical executives made over $300 million in salaries and in compensation. Enough is enough. We are going to tell the pharmaceutical industry that their greed is going to end. We're going to end it for them. Everybody in this country who needs medicine should be able to get the medicine they need at a price they can afford. At the end of the primary process, Secretary Clinton and I sat down and worked out some areas that we thought we could reach agreement on and go forward together on. And one area is of enormous consequence. We all know that we live in a highly competitive global economy. And we all know that if we are going to succeed in that global economy, we need the best educated workforce in the world. We know that technology is exploding, and people, young people, middle-aged people, working people need the education in order to deal with this changing technology. We know that 40, 50 years ago, if you had a high school degree, you could go out and get yourself a pretty good job. That world has changed. Technology has changed. Education has changed. Today, when we talk about public education, it is not good enough anymore to talk about first grade through 12th grade. We have got to make public colleges and universities tuition free. And the second area that Secretary Clinton and I talked about with regard to higher education is the very serious crisis of student debt. How many people here have student debt? Okay. What kind of interest rates are you paying? How much? 9%? 11%? 12%? Okay. I got it. You're getting ripped off is what it is. All right, so here's what. All right, next question. If you were to leave here and go out and buy yourself a brand new car, what would be the interest rates you pay on that car? 1%, 2%, 3%. Refinance your home in Vermont, I don't know what it is here, 3%, 4%. What it is here? Same thing? Same thing. And yet we have people paying 11 or 12% interest rates on their student loan. What Secretary Clinton believes and what I believe is that anybody with student debt should be able to refinance that debt at the lowest interest rates they can find. And I'll tell you what else I believe. There's a program, a federal program that I've been very active on that no one has ever heard of. It's called the National Health Service Corps. Anyone hear of that? National Health Service Corps? What it is, it says that if anybody here is interested in going to medical school, dental school, nursing school, graduate school for healthcare, if you are prepared to practice in a medically underserved area, the federal government will forgive your student debt. Well, I think it is time to expand that very good program. We need great teachers, we need great child care workers, and I think it is time to forgive the debt of those people who are prepared to go into professions that help the American people through nonprofit agencies. Now, one of the issues, which is an important issue that Mr. Trump has been talking about, is the issue of trade. Now, I come before you as Vermont Senator and a former congressman who has not only voted against every one of these disastrous trade agreements, I've walked the picket lines against these trade agreements. I know something about them. And I know that these trade agreements, including the Trans-Pacific Partnership, are written by corporate America and the drug companies and the big money interests. And what these trade agreements are about is to shut down plants in America and move to low-wage countries all over the world. And Mr. Trump has been going all over Ohio. He's been going all over America saying, Mr. Trump, I'm really concerned about outsourcing. Well, what the people of Ohio and America should know is that this great concern of his about outsourcing apparently does not apply to the companies that he owns. Mr. Trump today is employing people in Bangladesh at 33 cents an hour. Mr. Trump is manufacturing his clothing lines in Mexico and in China and building his furniture line in Turkey. So I say to Mr. Trump, it's easy to talk the talk, start walking the walk. If you are concerned about outsourcing, bring those jobs back to America. Now, here is another radical concept that distinguishes Secretary Clinton from Mr. Trump. It's a pretty radical idea. You ready for something really, really radical? All right, here you go. Don't collapse on me here. Hillary Clinton believes in science. I know that's a pretty radical idea. The idea that you would make public policy based on scientific investigation. Very radical idea in the year 2016, I must confess. And what Hillary knows, and what I know, and I know this as a member of the U.S. Senate Committee on the Environment, I have talked to scientists not only all over our country, but all over the world. And what the scientists are telling us in an almost unanimous voice, climate change is real, it is caused by human activity, and it is already causing devastating harm in our country and all over the world. That is the simple truth. And what the scientists are also telling us is they have underestimated the speed at which the planet is warming. And what they are telling us is if we do not get our act together, and that means transforming our energy system away from fossil fuel to energy efficiency and sustainable energy, what they are telling us, we're going to have more drought, more floods, more extreme weather disturbances, more rising sea levels, more acidification of the ocean, and more international conflict as people around the world fight over limited natural resources like water and land to grow their crops. That is the reality. That is what Secretary Clinton understands. Donald Trump, on the other hand, after years of scientific investigation, that's a joke, he has concluded, come up with a brilliant concept, because Donald Trump is always brilliant and always a genius and always knows more than anyone else. And his brilliant analysis, after years of study, is that climate change is a hoax emanating in China. Now, if the issue were not so serious, it really would be laughable. But my friends, this is a very, very serious issue. This is an issue which will determine whether or not the planet we leave to your kids and your grandchildren is a planet that is healthy and habitable. So if you are concerned about the future of this planet and our moral responsibility as custodians over this planet, please vote for Hillary Clinton, who has some serious ideas about transforming our energy system. Further, unlike Donald Trump, Hillary Clinton understands that our criminal justice system is broken and needs major reform. She understands there is something very wrong when we have more people in jail than any other country on earth. And she believes, as I do, that it makes a heck of a lot more sense to invest in education and jobs for young people rather than jails and incarceration. And Hillary Clinton also understands that with 11 million undocumented people in this country, we need comprehensive immigration reform and a path toward citizenship. Anybody who has ever studied American history has learned one very, very profound point. And that is real change, not superficial change. Real change never takes place from the top on down. It always takes place from the bottom on up. That is the history of the trade union movement, where workers came together and told their employers 100 years ago and longer, we are human beings, we're not beasts of burden, we're not animals to be working 70, 80 hours a week, we want time for our families, we want to be treated with dignities. Yes, we will form trade unions and negotiate collective bargaining. This is the history of the civil rights movement in this country, going back way, way before Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., where incredibly brave African Americans and their white allies said, the day will come when we will rid this country of racism. Millions of people. This is the story of the women's movement. Now, people don't know this. Children do not know this today. That 100 years ago, women in America did not have the right to vote, could not get the education or the jobs they wanted. Kids don't know that. Now, 100 years ago, from an historical perspective, is no time at all. But 100 years ago, women said, sorry, men will not determine our future. We will stand together. And women and their male allies took giant steps to make sure that women in America would not be second-class citizens. If we were here 10 years ago, and somebody said, you know, Bernie, I think that gay marriage will be legal in 50 states in the year 2015, the person next to her would have said, you're nuts. Because homophobia is just too deep in this country, and it just can't happen that quickly. But what happened is that the gay community and their straight allies, by the millions, stood up and demanded that in this country, people have the right to love whoever they wanted, regardless of gender. If we were here 5 years ago, no time at all, somebody jumps up and says, you know, Bernie, this federal minimum wage of $7.25 is horrific, it's terrible, we've got to raise that minimum wage to $15 an hour. The person next to him would have said, you're crazy. You want to go from $7.25 to $15 an hour. You want to more than double the minimum wage. What world are you living in? You're too radical. You're unrealistic. It can't happen. Do you know what happened 3 years ago in Seattle, Washington? $15 an hour. In California, $15. In New York State, $15. And if I have anything to say about it, we're going to be $15 in every state in this country. Now, why did I give you those examples? The examples that I give you, I want you to think back 100 years ago, where people would come to a meeting like this, or 130 years ago, and somebody would say, look, I know it's a radical idea, but I think women should have the right to vote and maybe go to university. And people say, what are you, crazy? Don't you know? Haven't you looked at, wasn't TV back then, haven't you read all the books, Women's Places in the Home? Or don't you know that racial segregation is God's will? That's the way it is. We can't change it. Don't you know that gay marriage is unthinkable? Can't be done. My point is, go back and put yourselves in the mind of those people at those times. And the struggles that they had to undertake were mammoth, standing up to the powerful special interest who wanted to maintain the status quo. And here we are today in exactly the same place. We have and should be very proud that we have come a long, long way in creating a less discriminatory society in every respect. And we should be proud of that as Americans. But this is where we have not come a long way, and this is where, in fact, we are losing ground. And I want you to be thinking about these issues so that your grandchildren will think back upon this day and not believe the reality. It is not acceptable that so few have so much and so many live in poverty. I want you to be able to tell your grandchildren that you stood up for justice and you told the billionaire class they're going to have to pay their fair share of taxes in America. And I want you to tell your granddaughters 50 years from now that you helped lead the fight for pay equity for women. And when your grandson tells you that he can't believe that you ever lived in a time when millions of people had no health insurance or couldn't afford to go to a doctor, you tell your grandson you were there in fighting to make sure that every American had health care as a right. And maybe most importantly, I don't want your grandchildren to say to you, Grandma, Grandpa, why did you allow this planet to become the way it became, with more drought, more floods, more extreme weather disturbances? Why didn't you listen to the science and have the guts to take on the fossil fuel industry and tell them that the future of this planet is more important than their short-term profits? So my message to you is twofold. We got 5 days left to an enormously important election, and all of you, I hope, will join me, and I've been busy running all over this country, in making sure that Donald Trump does not become President of the United States. But second of all, and more importantly, all of you are enormously powerful people if you choose to exercise that power. So after we elect Hillary on November 8th, I want you to wake up on November 9th, roll up your sleeves, and begin the process of taking on the billionaire class and transforming this country. Thank you all very much.